Hi, this is Yemi Stembridge. Thank you for joining me as I do something a little different than what I've done with previous podcasts. Like many of you, I've been paying careful attention to our nation's most recent disturbing and tragic episodes of police brutality and the horrific and unthinkable attacks on the law enforcement officers in Dallas, Texas. These events have given me great pause, and I am left to ponder what it is that we, all of us, should be thinking and doing as we prepare to welcome students back to our classrooms for another school year. I have always believed that teaching is a profoundly social and human endeavor, and by that I mean the actions taken by great teachers prepare students to be productive members of society and also powerfully affirms their humanity. This is accomplished through gestures small and large. Many teachers, while well-meaning and sincere about the cause of equity, don't know where to start in doing their part to bring the many diverse parts of our community together. There is no single easy answer to all that we as a nation are confronted by in this pivotal moment, but I do suggest a specific area of consideration for teachers. As the next school year begins, I would encourage every educator to think long and hard and as carefully as possible about how an authentic sense of community is being established in your teaching spaces. I'd encourage you to think about what a meaningful sense of community means to you and your students. In May of 2015, I had the great pleasure of sitting down with two teachers at the Highline Community School of the Cherry Creek School District in Aurora, Colorado. I've been working with the Highline staff for 3 years, and in this conversation, I was able to reflect with fifth grade teacher Jacqueline King, who is now teaching fourth grade at Cimarron Elementary School, and first grade teacher Suzanne Causer about their work and thoughts, specifically in terms of community. Joining us for the conversation was Professor Erica Walker of Teachers College, Columbia University. Dr. Walker is a professor of mathematics education, and her research focuses on mathematics communities for vulnerable learners. I said I was doing something different with this podcast, and by that I mean I'm offering segments of this conversation, which was deep and long and thoughtful, for easier consumption in shorter podcast form. I encourage teachers to listen to these podcasts with a pad and pen or stylus and tablet so as to capture the ideas I hope the dialogue generates about your own beliefs and mindset, and also practical applications in the classroom and other instructional spaces where you play such a key role in nurturing the identities of students. Remember, the sense of identity is intimately connected to perceptions of community. In the end, our country's issues with race, class, social justice, and equity are more likely resolved when we all recognize that we are beholden to each other for our collective well-being. When we listen to each other and engage in the most authentic sense of community, we create the America we want for ourselves and our children. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening.
I think of community as a group of people engaged in a shared enterprise. And I think of community both broadly and narrowly, which I can talk a bit more about.
I really would like for you to do that, and specifically in the context of your book, Building Mathematics Learning Communities, Improving Outcomes in Urban High Schools. Can you tell us a little bit of what you learned about this idea of community and how it facilitates students' engagement in school?
That book really arose from a project I was doing in a high school here in New York, in which I was interviewing high-achieving students in mathematics about their experiences with mathematics, really, both in and out of school. And one thing that kept emerging was that they were talking about all these people who they worked with, talked to about mathematics. And some of these people are, typical people that you would think of that young people would identify as helping them, like teachers, their current teachers. But they also talked about their parents, they talked about their siblings, they talked about cousins, they talked about neighbors, they talked about various people outside of school as well as within school who contributed to their mathematics success. And I found this idea so intriguing, in part because some of the people were, kind of unexpected. Students talked about, oh, my mom's boss, gave me these math books, or I have an enemy in my class, and so we compete, and that really makes me do well in math. So that was somewhat surprising. The other piece that was intriguing was that often teachers and the administrators were sort of unaware of the extent of these communities that supported students' math learning. So pulling from that idea, I started to think about, these communities and how can we really operationalize and use the work that these communities are already doing in our classrooms. So I developed a peer tutoring model that drew from these communities that kids said they had. And I wanted young people to be in charge of this peer tutoring model in school. Part of that was because I noticed, as in many typical high school classrooms, the teacher is the sole arbiter of mathematics knowledge. The teacher knows everything. So if young people are struggling with an idea, they raise their hand, they wait for the teacher to help them. So I really wanted to help this school and these teachers in the school to have more of a community happening in their classroom, to have more peer-to-peer discussion of mathematical concepts instead of students just relying on the teacher. So this peer tutoring model drew on some existing networks that young people had already told me they had. And it was just a matter of setting aside some time after school, but eventually this also happened during the school day. The young people were so excited about the way the after-school model was running. They said, can we do this during lunch? Why not? So they would have these peer groups in the cafeteria working on primarily math homework, but also studying for tests and just sort of helping each other. It was a very successful model.
In your experience, what do the kids need? What do they need most out of these communities, these networks? What do they gain that they talked about in their conversation with you?
I think it was a couple of things. One thing that I certainly experienced myself as a student was the knowledge that people were invested in my success and in my learning. So when I looked back on my own communities that supported my learning in general, I realized it encompassed not just my parents and my siblings, but neighbors, people I went to church with. All those people were really invested, and they were invested in different ways. Sometimes it was giving me books. Sometimes it was just saying, good job. Sometimes it was just coming to school programs. But just this idea that people, adults and my peers as a teenager were interested in what I was doing and invested in my success. And we were all invested in each other's success and learning. So I think that's one big piece, that young people feel like, we're in this together. We care about what's happening to each other, not just academically, but certainly within school, academics would be a focus. The other thing is that I think it's very important to have adults other than your parents sort of pushing you academically. I think there comes a point that we probably can all relate to where we might have gotten a little tired of our parents saying, did you do your homework? Did you do this? Did you do that? But to feel that your teacher, and not just your current teacher, but past teachers, are still thinking about you. So a number of the students in that high school study said, I'm still talking to my middle school teachers, and they asked me how I'm doing in my math class. Like, that was really important to them. They mentioned that very clearly.
So it's interesting because the way you describe this, there's almost an element of subversiveness in terms of how students initially put together these networks in order to support each other in their mathematics learning. Does that contribute to the buy-in that kids have in these communities?
I think that's a really interesting point, and it supports something that we found with the peer tutoring model, that I had to tell the teachers, just let it go. Let the kids run the model, let the kids do the tutoring. It's fine if there isn't any adult intervention. And the biggest question I had from teachers and my own colleagues was, well, what if, a kid can't help another kid? Then what happens? I said, well, they can talk to, we had Teachers College graduate students, there as mentors. I was like, I really would like for them to talk to each other first, to the other peer tutors, and then to talk to the Teachers College graduate student. Because I really wanted to get out of this mode of, let me immediately defer to the teacher. And the kids were actually pretty quick to catch on to this. And the teachers had, I think, more difficulty stepping back from that. But once it really got off the ground, the teachers found themselves learning from the young people, learning pedagogical strategies, learning metaphors for mathematical ideas, and sort of citing them in class, saying, yesterday I was in this peer tutoring program and I saw, Jessica's explanation. Jessica, would you like to share your explanation of this to the class? So I think that was a very powerful thing. I think these sort of many communities are sort of hidden a bit from adult eyes, perhaps, but I think students are ready to talk about them. And if we can help them activate them, that could be a very powerful thing for schools.
I wonder if you can give me just maybe a small snapshot of the peer tutoring model in action and tell me what in this snapshot is the evidence of student empowerment? What's the evidence of engagement? How do we know it when we see it in the context of a snapshot in your peer tutoring model?
One of the best examples I think I can give you of that happened on a day when I was observing. So the peer tutoring model in this particular year operated 3 days a week for a couple of hours after school, and we had 5 or 6 regular tutors. It was a fairly small school. Usually we had anywhere between 15 and 20 kids coming after school for tutoring support. And for some reason, one day we were really light on tutors. I'm not really sure what was happening. And one of the young people who was usually coming to get tutored said, "Oh, I understood that. I can explain that." So the fact that he felt so empowered by the space because it was really set up for the young people to be in charge, he didn't hesitate. He explained it. We all said, "Okay, we understand it now. We agree." And the fact that he could shift, his identity was not solely a tutee. He felt confident enough to become a tutor. That was very unusual. And the teacher, in fact, who was in the room supervising, talked to me later about that and said she thought that was really good, that the student who usually is sort of quiet and positioned in a particular way was becoming a tutor, and did that more frequently as the semester went on because he was improving. Like, he wasn't always going to be stuck in a particular role. What happens is that the peer tutoring program gets discussed among students as, oh, it's a place where you can hang out with your friends and do math. That's a great characterization. And so kids are bringing their friends to peer tutoring, and kids are getting help from their favorite tutor. And so it creates this sense that we're here together. It's really a kind of a social activity in addition to an academic activity. And I think there's a lot of work in college and higher education literature that speaks to the power of sort of blending the social and academic piece. Yuri Treisman's work comes to mind. But I don't think we do enough of that in secondary schools, certainly. And so I think when you have that, it sort of becomes powerful, and it helps to broaden the identity of particular students and particular groups of students, which can be very powerful. People have been doing this in some form for a long time. I don't think we do enough of it in secondary school for mathematics in particular. I think teachers in other content areas, when you think about all the work that's going on in literacy and social studies, where, of course, young people are reading different types of texts, and they're talking together, they're discussing things. Of course, that's happening in those disciplines. It happens much less often in mathematics. I think that a lot of the mathematics reform we've seen over the past 20 to 30 years is sort of trying to move us in this direction. But the reality is that when you walk into, I would say, most high schools, you see sort of what we all experience in high school mathematics, which is the teacher talking very knowledgeably and the students, working usually individually on problems.
What are some of the lessons that you would want to convey in terms of building that sense of community, building that sense of identity? What are some takeaways that you would offer to classroom teachers, not just in mathematics, but at any grade level, at any subject area?
Well, I'm so pleased to be here with Jackie and Suzanne because, as you said, and as I've heard, they're amazing classroom teachers, and it sounds like what they're doing in their classrooms really facilitate this sort of environment for creativity and community and collaboration in mathematics. So that's really exciting to hear about. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. But I would say that, a direct quote from one of the mathematicians I interviewed was that from elementary school, from first grade on through fifth grade until she got to sixth grade, she said, I always liked mathematics, but it was just sort of the same thing day after day. It was plugging and chugging, plugging and chugging. And then she got to sixth grade, and she had this amazing teacher. And in the interview, she actually teared up a little bit. And she says, I'm tearing up a little bit, oh my goodness. Because suddenly math was something that was really interesting. We were solving problems. We were talking about the mathematics to each other. It wasn't all that plugging and chugging. So I think there's some need for plugging and chugging sometimes, but it doesn't have to be the only way that young people experience mathematics.